then it's not going to zero. And if it's not going to zero, it's going to 1 million. Education, and with education comes adoption. At this point, you just have 95% of the world that still doesn't quite understand what it is. And that means the way Bitcoin marches from 100,000 to 13 million, you're referring to my long-term forecast. I gave that forecast in Nashville in July, and it's based upon the Bitcoin 24 model. So the Bitcoin 24 model is an open source macro model of Bitcoin adoption and macroeconomic development over the next 21 years. Anybody can go to Google and they can Google Bitcoin 24. They'll find it on GitHub. You can download that model. You can plug in all your own assumptions and you can check what we thought. But my forecast is Bitcoin, in essence, it's growing 60% a year for quite a while now. And I'm forecasting it will decelerate to 20% a year over 21 years. But that means on average, it grows about 29% a year, ARR. And that 29% a year for 21 years gets you to 13 million a coin. And so what do I expect to happen? Well, I expect lots of high net worth individuals that previously thought it's too risky or it's too scary. They see it legitimized by BlackRock. Now BlackRock is giving guidance that you could have 2% of your portfolio in Bitcoin. And they're seeing the ETFs like IBIT. And they're noticing these are the most successful ETFs in the history of the world. And BlackRock has got the most successful ETF ever launched. And now they're seeing the world's largest money manager, BlackRock, with more than $11 trillion of money managed. They're seeing them publish scholarly, thoughtful, responsible white papers on portfolio allocation. And instead of the 60-40 model with 60% equity and 40% bonds, now you've got 2% that they're saying you might want to put into a crypto asset like Bitcoin. So I think that you've got that group of people that are finding it. I also think you've got institutional investors that are moving into Bitcoin more frequently now. A lot of them are big investors in MicroStrategy. A lot of them trade MicroStrategy options. MicroStrategy's been the most successful stock in the S&P index. We're not in the S&P, but we're more successful than all 500 S&P companies for the past 4 years. I think this year too. So we're getting the attention of mainstream investors, and that's bringing a set of new investors to the asset class because when they buy our stock, we buy Bitcoin with it. I think the third driver is a bunch of Bitcoin standard companies. A lot of companies are recapitalizing their balance sheets on Bitcoin. MicroStrategy was the first, but Mara has done it, M-A-R-A, and Riot just announced they're doing it. And the most successful company in the Japanese stock market this year is Metaplanet, and they just did it. And Similar Scientific just did it, and they tripled their stock in very short order. So you've got like a half dozen companies that are recapitalizing to the Bitcoin standard, but you've got 60 companies that have Bitcoin, and there's a lot of companies that are getting more heavily involved. I think recently Hut 8 announced, HUT, and then Rumble. And so a bunch of public companies, they're innovators, they've got a fairly open mind, and they're flexible. And the really important thing about that, Tom, is when a public company adopts Bitcoin, they start sweeping their cash flows into it. But then after that, they may start issuing equity. And then after that, they can borrow money. So Riot just this week issued a $500 million convertible bond, and then they bought Bitcoin with it. And so Mara did the same thing. They did a $1 billion convertible bond deal, and they bought Bitcoin. And then they did another $850 million bond deal 2 weeks later. And MicroStrategy, when we announced we were going to pursue a Bitcoin treasury company model, we announced that October 30th of just this year. And we've raised, something in the range of $15 billion in the last 6 weeks. And so you're talking about large sums of money that are flowing. I mean, much larger sums. It took us 30 years to accumulate $500 million in order to buy Bitcoin in 2020. It took us 4 years to accumulate $10 billion. And we bought Bitcoin over the next 4 years. But then it took us like 4 weeks or 5 weeks to accumulate the next 15 billion. So you would check off that box, which is company adoption. Then after that, You've got like institutional adoption, the endowments and the pension funds, there's now pension funds that are starting to allocate to Bitcoin, and there'll be big university endowments and 501c3s and insurance companies. And so that's another driver. And then you've got nation states. And of course, the news of the week is the United States Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. And the US already has about 1% of the Bitcoin. If they don't sell it, that's a big deal. And Donald Trump said, never sell your Bitcoin. And then he was elected president. But now you have Senator Cynthia Lummis advocating for a US Strategic Bitcoin Reserve. You have a very supportive cabinet, lots of cabinet members that have been pro-Bitcoin. And then Senator Lummis just posted a tweet just a few hours ago, having met with the incoming Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent, saying that she looks forward to working with him on this. And presumably that means that he is also supportive. And we know that the Trump White House and Trump is supportive. He was asked on the New York Stock Exchange floor, I think yesterday, by Jim Cramer about it. Will you do something like this? And he said, I think so. I think we need to lead. So I think that that's also positive. So let's just say there's a lot of different entities in the world with capital. I mean, who doesn't want to keep their money? Who doesn't want more money, right? Everybody wants to either keep their money or they could use more money. And so Bitcoin is digital money. It's the greatest digital monetary network in the world, but maybe it's the first example of what I call digital capital. Money, just so I can help people not be confused, money is a generic term, but it decomposes in the modern world into two elements, currency and capital. Currency is the dollar and the peso and the euro. That is the medium of exchange asset. It is designated legal tender. That means you can swap it without paying a tax bill on it. And it means it's liquid and fungible, and probably it's good for paying taxes, and everybody prices things in it. That's not going to change. The world reserve currency is the dollar. The dollar's been the world reserve currency since just after World War I. And in different forms, the dollar is getting stronger, not weaker. But there's another aspect of money. It's store of value. If I had a liquid fungible asset that was a store of value that I could give to my children's children, well, nobody thinks that's the dollar, and nobody in the US thinks it's the dollar. Rich people in the US don't have 50% of their assets invested in dollar bills. And what they do think it is in the modern world is they think it's the S&P index, like the Vanguard 500 or SPY or some index fund. Or maybe they think it's real estate, and real estate's a store of value, but it's not liquid and fungible. So it's a little bit different. It's difficult to swap it out in units of $1 million every day. And so it's not quite money, but it is capital in that regard. And gold for 5,000 years was kind of capital. A bar of gold bullion was that long-term store of value asset that people use. Bitcoin is emerging as digital capital. And people, they're not going to use it as a medium exchange to buy a cup of coffee. But if you want to buy something to give to your granddaughter that she can't mess up, even though she's 3 years old, and you don't want to worry about it every day, and you don't want to trade it, and you don't want to worry about antitrust and whether or not there'll be rent control on the building or renting it out, you just buy her one Bitcoin. And you put it in cold storage, and then 60 years from now, she'll be rich because the one Bitcoin will probably be worth $50 million or $100 million, right? And so what's going on right now is the emergence of Bitcoin as a digital capital network for the world. And the thing driving it from 100,000 to 13 million over the next 21 years is the adoption of it as a capital asset by people that have the wealth, have the capital. By the way, the currency collapsed in Venezuela. It collapsed in Argentina. It collapsed in Brazil. It collapsed in Cuba. It collapsed in Russia. It collapsed in every single country in Africa. You see? And so foreigners actually get it a bit better, right? It's like the bank's going to take your money. The currency's going to zero. The government's going to promise you it'll be okay and tell you to put your money in the bank. Then they're going to inflate the currency, freeze your bank account, crash the currency, and then tell you it's worthless. That's what happened in Cyprus not too long ago, if you want to go and Google that. And so the real promise of Bitcoin is very simple. It's a bank in cyberspace that won't steal your money. And it's an asset that you can store your life savings in that nobody can debase or corrupt. And those are two powerful promises for the first time in the history of the human race. No one ever gave you those two promises ever before now. I think, let's talk about it in sports metaphors. It's like, first of all, there's some games that you can't play, you got to watch. And if you're just watching the game and the team wins, that means your season tickets are going to get more expensive next year. But there are other games you can play. You go into a casino and you play the game, but you know the game's rigged against you. There are some games where the house wins, you're not winning. And Satoshi created a game that's rigged in favor of the individual.
Is he a real person?
Satoshi is a real person, gone but not forgotten. The most important thing to know is that, like Prometheus gave us fire to warm you up, Satoshi gave us a game we can all win, right? And Bitcoin is that game. There are certain things where, like, you don't want to be on a network where they can censor what you say and they can freeze your account. Bitcoin is a monetary network where it won't censor where you send your money. It won't freeze your account. And it's engineered in such a way that on the margin, you're winning the game over time. Think of it like, wouldn't it be great if you had a basketball team and you had LeBron James and you had Michael Jordan and you had the digital version of them and they played forever and you could get on the court and play with them and they're scoring 100 points and you're scoring 2 points, but you're all getting rich together and you're all winning together. That's what Bitcoin is like. It's like everybody gets to play. Everywhere in the world I go, there's like a fan club. There's hundreds of millions of people that are on Team Bitcoin. You should join Team Bitcoin. The 100 million fans would be rooting for you. And the great thing about it is you don't just win the game, you get wealthy while you're winning the game. I think we got to play the game of life, and half the game of life is economics. And so you have to play the economic game whether you like it or not. So you can put your money in a Lebanese bank and use Lebanese currency. The government inflates the currency, the bank freezes your assets, and you fail at the game of life. You can put your money in any asset in Africa, or you can put your money into Bitcoin. So the real appeal of Bitcoin is everybody in the world, I mean, they don't want to put their money in a bank in the middle of Africa in an African currency you've never heard of. Bitcoin gives you control of your money, right? And is that egalitarian? Yeah. Is that humanitarian? Sure, it is. Is it economically smart? Yeah, they're connected, right? You have to have economic empowerment if you're going to achieve whatever you want in life. And to be economically empowered, you have to be on a network that won't freeze you or censor you. And you got to have an asset that nobody else can debase. No corporation can screw up. No country can screw up, and that's what Bitcoin represents. There's certain places where the land values go through the roof. Like the land we're standing on right now in Miami, it used to go for $10,000 an acre, and now it goes for $10 million, $20 million an acre. It's up by a factor of 1,000 in less than 100 years. Same in the Hamptons, same in Manhattan. I grew up in Faribault, Ohio. The land in Faribault, Ohio did not go up by a factor of 1,000. Right. The land in the middle of the swamps or the land in the Rocky Mountains doesn't go up. So if I gave you the chance to buy up all of Palm Beach or the Hamptons or Manhattan, anytime in the past 100 years, it would have been a good deal. In fact, in 1650, you could have bought Manhattan, 1700. You could buy land in Manhattan every decade for the past 300 years at a price higher than the person that sold it to you bought it for, and it still would be a good investment. The only thing that slightly slows you down is the property tax, but assume there's no property tax, you would buy it and hold it forever. Now, if you're an African or South American or Russian or Chinese, you can't buy land in the United States easily. You don't want to own the land in Africa any more than you want to own the land, in the middle of the Rocky Mountains. It's not going to appreciate. So Bitcoin represents cyber Manhattan. It's 21 million blocks. Everybody with money in the world is going to want to put some of their money there, right? How much of their money? Well, if you lived in Lebanon or Iraq or Syria right now, the money you have in Bitcoin you still have, and the money you have in the local bank you don't have anymore. Mm-hmm. If you need to leave a country or flee for your life, and that happens a lot, the money you have in Bitcoin you get to keep. The money you have in land or buildings or local currencies or a local bank, you lose. So Bitcoin really represents that strongest, greatest city in cyberspace, and it's going to be the center of the digital economy. Like, the really nice thing about it is when you're buying a block or 10 blocks of Manhattan in the year like 1900, You don't know what people are going to do with it, but you kind of figure that all the smart people will move to New York and they'll want that land to build a building on it. And you're going to get wealthy because you're holding it. The same is true with Bitcoin. If you're living in Africa or China or Russia or Argentina and you buy Bitcoin, you don't really know what you're going to do with it. But guess what? MicroStrategy just bought $2 billion of it this week. I know what I'm going to do with it. And I bought it at 100,000. So if you bought Bitcoin at 5,000, yeah, I'm going to keep buying. I joke. So you said, well, is 100,000 too much? And I said, look, Dave, I'll be buying it at $1 million a coin. And I'll probably be buying it at the rate of $1 billion a day at $1 million a coin, because that's what I do. Just like, Manhattan real estate's really expensive in 1930. It's a lot more expensive than 1830. I'm like, well, 100 years later, we'll still be buying it and we'll be paying a lot more. The only issue is, can you hold it for that time period? Because people are going to want to buy it. In March of 2020, we all get punched in the face. And for 6 months, you're like, well, do I leave? Do I move to Miami? Do I get in the stock market? Do I buy Bitcoin? What do I do? So for about 6 months, I spent trying to figure out what I'm going to do. And we discovered Bitcoin. And I thought, well, it's not without risk, but everything else is worse. Everything else is a fast death or a slow death. So I'm going to do something new. Over the next 4 years, the risk got taken off. The administration embraced it as a commodity, and that was one risk factor taken off. And then we got the ETFs, that was the second risk factor. And then you got the Trump administration embracing it and the red sweep, that's the third risk factor. And then MicroStrategy, we bought 250 million. We bought 250 million at like 11,800 coin, and then it crashed 20%, Dave.
Yeah.
And we lost $40 million in the next week and a half. And that was, I'm figuring out how to buy the next 250 million. Because I'm in, you're in. Once you're committed, you're in, and I'm like, I'm going to ride it to zero or we're going to win. But I've decided I want to win. And I knew that if I didn't play the game, I was certainly going to lose. So, that was the difficult time. But then Bitcoin rallied and went back to the all-time high. From August of 2020 to about a month ago, we raised $10 billion because everybody got behind us and we had a strategy and we committed to it. And then there was the red sweep and big November, and we raised $15 billion in 4.5 weeks. So now we put $25 billion into the network. But it's like, decide what you're going to do with your life, focus, commit. And yeah, you're going to get punched. You're going to get beat in the face a little bit. You'll take a few. Yeah, I would say you take your money and you divide it between scarce, desirable real estate you want to live in. You like this place. Yep. And then I say you take some and you put it in like a big tech stock portfolio, maybe Magnificent Seven or things you like. And you take another portion, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's 20%, maybe it's 30%, somewhere in that range. And you buy digital property, you buy Bitcoin with it. So 2% probably, that's an insurance policy. Yeah. 2% is an insurance policy. You're not going to get rich buying flood insurance for your house. 10%, you're a player, 20, 30%, you probably make a lot of money. And if you're a maximalist, you go to 50% or 75%. But at that point, you're really focused upon that. My view is Bitcoin is like a protocol, like it's an asset without an issuer. When I'm promoting Bitcoin, it's like I'm saying electricity, fire, English, math, and Bitcoin, Dave. Like teach your kids those things. And then you say, what do I think about other investments? I'm like, well, that building might be good to buy. That Picasso might be at a good price. Maybe you should buy some NVIDIA. Maybe that's a good price. Those are 100,000 investments. You have to be the expert. If you're an expert and you can play that game, then you should. I have nothing negative to say about it. But what I'm saying is, if you just want to take some amount of your money, hold it for 100 years and not worry about it, you want the world's global dominant economic protocol, the capital protocol, and that's Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is like a savings decision. I just want to save my money without someone effing with it and taking it. Everything else is you're an investor and you're playing a game and you got to make your own decision. There's a lot of investors in the world that aren't allowed to buy Bitcoin. Like in the UK, they won't let you buy Bitcoin in your retirement account. So they need to buy a company, a security. So sometimes people buy our stock because they have to buy a company and they're not allowed. There's hundreds of trillions of dollars of money, some of it with professional money managers. They're not allowed to buy Bitcoin. They're allowed to buy Bitcoin companies. So some people buy our equity for that. Some people are bond investors. They want the upside. They don't want any downside. If you're going to hold your capital, hold your investment for 10 years, then Bitcoin's a great idea. I'd say the minimum is 4 years. Bitcoin's 100,000 right now, Dave. No one's ever lost money buying Bitcoin. No one's ever made money if they're